Hello and welcome back to the Simplifiers podcast, where we take topics in business and in life and simplify them. And friends, let's be real. The topic today is not easy. However, I think it is incredibly necessary and I dare say is bubbling up underneath the surface for a lot of us. We're traversing the unknown, the uncertain path of what life looks like going through a pandemic and actually recovering and coming out of a pandemic as we start to rebuild and reimagine what our businesses and our communities and our lives look like. But the underlying problem is if you don't feel okay as a leader, how do you actually lead both your company, your employees, your staff, your families, and more? Well, I wanted to bring this special guest on because I think he is the quintessential expert in this specific topic. His name is Patrick Regan, and he is the CEO and co-founder of Kansui Hope, a UK-based charity aiming to make a difference to people's mental well-being. He's traveled to over 30 countries around the world, working with and on behalf of the poorest communities. In fact, in 2010, he received the Mayor of London Peace Award for his contribution towards peace and justice, and also awarded an OBE, which is the Order of a British Empire from Her Majesty the Queen for services to young people. He's the author of 5 books, including his latest, Honesty Over Silence, exploring the importance of holding on to our faith in challenging times. So I'd like to welcome to the Simplifiers podcast, Patrick Regan. Hey, Patrick.
Hey, good to see you.
I am so glad you're here. And, you know, to be honest, I remember when you and I met was actually the last day of quote unquote normalcy in my own life. We met back on, I believe it was March 14th, 2020. You spoke at a Kansui Hope event at my church at Trent Vineyard in Nottingham, England. And I remember as you graced the stage and I remember sitting in the audience thinking, you know, this is such a dynamic speaker and also very timely as things were very uncertain and unsettled. And then just shortly after, the Prime Minister said, yep, okay, we're in lockdown for 3 weeks. That's where it all began. Gosh, I remember one thing you said on stage that really, I wrote it in big letters in my journal. It was, well, how do you lead when you're not okay? And I thought, well, yeah, I'd like to know that as well, Patrick. So let's break down that as a topic for today's conversation.
Brilliant.
So you have been working in and about charities and nonprofits for what seems like the last 30 years or so. And your newest venture is called Kansui Hope. And what I want to start with is realizing that, you know, we're starting to rebuild from this pandemic and we're by no means finished and through it. What have you learned from researching and studying past natural disasters? What can we learn from the past as we apply to the now and the present?
Well, it's a great question. And I think that from looking at the research, there often seems to be 3 key stages in a natural disaster in terms of recovery. And I think it's going to be the same for us, whether you're in business, whether you're in the voluntary sector. The first key phase is response, and we're sort of in that phase now. And that really sort of goes to Maslow's hierarchy of needs. It's the bottom one. We want to be fed. We've got to get the right food. We want to make sure our family are okay. We want to get essential stuff. And apparently in England, toilet rolls are very essential. And it's getting all that stuff in place really, really quickly. And when we're running an organization or something, we sort of have to pivot at that point. We have to try and make sure the organization, the business can survive. And lots of people working out, how do I do this online? Lots of people hearing about Zoom and Microsoft Teams who probably wouldn't have done it beforehand. Secondly is what they call the recovery phase. And I guess this is when lockdown starts to get eased. And the recovery phase is actually probably one of those phases where experts say that's when the tsunami of mental health issues can come. It's a bit like when you're in the war, you know, a lot of the issues come after the war, like PTSD and I think at the moment, when you're in this response phase, we don't know the extent of some of the issues that are there. We know domestic violence has gone up. Most safeguarding issues are picked up from schools, So they're not getting picked up at the moment. And we also know that when we get into the recovery phase and people are finally allowed to meet, is there's going to have to be a lot of memorial services, because people are obviously have funerals where there's only 4 people present. So we want to remember people who we really care about. And that's going to be a really important phase. We need to work out how we grieve well, rather than suppressing everything down.
Yeah.
And then the third phase is they talk about reconstruction. And that where we start asking ourselves really big questions. What sort of society do we want to be? And I think, we start to talk about values. Values inform your behavior. And so the values of family, I think, will be pretty high. The values of health will be high. I hope that we start to realize that some of the people that we've described in the past as low-skilled workers in a week became our key workers.
Yeah.
And yet they're still on salaries of what you describe as unskilled workers, where we're actually maybe in our value system, we should go, you know what, that's not fair and it's not right. The most deprived neighborhoods in England anyway, and I'm sure it's probably repeated around the world, are getting coronavirus at twice the rate that affluent areas are. And so there's a lot of looking at our values as a country, looking at our values and going, you know what? There's time to maybe rethink some of those things around education, around health, around business, around how we treat each other. So I think those phrases are quite helpful in thinking your way through this process.
And it's really interesting that you frame it that way. I mean, you've read studies on Haiti, right? The recovery from Haiti. I've also looked at like Hurricane Katrina, and how communities and neighborhoods, churches and nonprofits, and also the government respond to these horrific situations. Here is an opportunity where we are literally experiencing this on a global scale. It's not just one city or one country. So when you put it into that framework of response, recovery, and reconstruction, it really does simplify it down to me of like, okay, where are we right now in that recovery phase? And I also like to think about reconstruction as also that moment of reimagine. Just as you say, like, where are the stopgaps and the weak points in how our supply chain works? Or even, as you say, with poorer communities, are they getting the resources they need? That should be equal. There should be a level of equity to it.
Yeah.
Do you have any ideas of where to begin with that?
Yeah, I think there's some big questions to ask. I think one of the massive questions actually is around people that suffer from chronic illness. I was interviewing someone who's got ME for a TV program I was hosting, and she was saying, she has to lay down for 20 hours out of 24 hours a day, and she can't get out of the house hardly at all. She's a wheelchair user, and she's very much part of the chronic illness community, and some of our language, particularly at the beginning times of the coronavirus, about underlying health issues, and and there was a lot of worth attached to people. Some, if they've got an underlying health issues, and they were a burden, and it was terrible.
Yeah. And
but what she was saying to me, which I found is so challenging, was within a week, she's someone of faith, and she's been asking people of faith to go online for years, so the chronic illness community could access. And of course, there's been lots of reasons why we can't. And within a week, 53,000 churches managed to go online. And she was like, please don't stop doing that when this is over. Don't get me wrong, I know you want to meet, but there's a whole community here that you've never reached, which now you can reach.
Right.
And then she said something which really made me think, where she said, when you care for the disabled, the chronically ill, the most vulnerable, if you work out how to care for them, you'll care for everyone. Because what you'll do is you'll come up with ways that are inclusive. And I think that was really challenging. How do we reimagine a society where actually those that have been excluded in the past can now be included in the present? And I think that's fascinating for me.
Yeah, and again, it's a challenge for all of us, small business owners, large business owners, leaders in various sizes of circle of influence. When you do think of the people who have the most challenges on their plate, how do you serve them first? I think it's
Yeah.
been really fascinating for me. I mean, I've been an entrepreneur for 17 years now, to watch how businesses have been responding. I think for quite a few of us, and I'll put my hand up first to admit, first couple of weeks of lockdown, it was sort of like, well, I'll just kind of hide over here. I'll sort of numb myself on Netflix. I'll just pretend like nothing's going on, and we're just on vacation, right? And do nothing. Right? Just wait and then respond. But what I've been really inspired by is the scrappy, the lean businesses and charities that are pivoting and responding to those in need by saying, okay, well, we used to do this, and now we need to do this because our audience, our customers, our clients need us most here. And I think that those that have actually stepped up to the challenge of pivoting, doesn't have to be a massive pivot either. It's been fascinating to watch my own church move their in-person 3 services to an online platform that really, truly is incredible to see how fast they were able to pivot, refine, and serve. What about you? Have you seen a couple of businesses or groups that you've just been like, man, it's been so great seeing how they've responded to this pandemic as well?
Yeah, I mean, I think most of the people I've been working with in the charitable sector have had to pivot in some ways. I think it was interesting, like you say. I think some people, when it initially happened, there were 2 reactions. One were like, we've got to pivot now. We've got to get everything online. Other people in my, even in my trustee board, like, well, let's see what happens. Let's wait a couple of weeks.
Yeah.
For those that wanted to pivot straight away, we got exhausted very quickly, I think, which I think leaders, pioneers, entrepreneurs do. I think the challenge is, for most leaders I know, vision is what drives them. It's what gets them out of bed in the morning. And vision, can often be defined as seeing the invisible that produces energy and passion in people.
Yeah.
It's really hard to see the future. But I think those 3 Ps that often people are talking about are so important. What's the one thing in my life, business, charity that I need to persevere with? Because there are some things we need to persevere. That is crucial to our DNA. What do we need to pivot? What do we need to change? And then what do we need to pioneer in this phase? And that's been interesting as well. I know for us in Kansui Hope, we have this wellbeing course that was run offline, which is now run online through Zoom. All our training moved online, and actually it's growing at a faster rate than it was before lockdown. I guess most people realize that the subjects of well-being are so important. I think how we engage with the community. There was a lovely little story in our community. My wife sort of pioneered it, but one of the problems the hospital was having was not allowing loved ones to be with family members as they died because of infection and that sort of stuff. And so there's a scheme where people were knitting hearts. And they knitted 2 hearts, one for the family and one to be put on the bed or be held by the person who was really, really ill. And just so that connection point, was beautiful. And there's been a lot of creativity, a lot of acts of kindness happening in communities.
And I think that in that response, it doesn't have to be massive. I mean, something as simple as 2 hearts can give the same impact as great. And I think that let's talk about being how to lead when you're not okay. Your company, your charity is called Kansui Hope. And if you don't know what the term Kansui means, can you define that for us first? What is the practice of Kansui?
Yeah, definitely. Well, Kansui is a Japanese word. It means golden joinery. And I've got my little demonstration here. So here's my bowl, which was broken and mended with super glue. So you can't see the cracks and pretend it's okay. I guess it looks like every other bowl, which is this color and this shape. But what they do in Japan is when something was broken, instead of mending it with super glue, they put a gold powder in the glue. So instead of hiding the cracks, they make a feature of the cracks. So arguably the object becomes more beautiful than it was before. It certainly becomes more unique. There isn't a bowl like this now on planet Earth, actually. It's completely different. for being broken. And I think our scars are not there to be ashamed of. Our scars are places of healing. In fact, behind me, there is a massive kintsugi bowl. I don't know if you can see that there.
Yeah.
And someone painted that while I was speaking at a conference as a creative response. And I think people have just recognized that, life breaks all of us at some point, but it doesn't have to be wasted, that actually something beautiful come out of brokenness. And you know that, don't you? Because the amount of things that start from a painful place, I've had to work with mums whose kids have been stabbed and killed. And as a result, they've set up foundations. They've helped thousands of people. You see it where people have had to just persevere the most outrageous stuff, and they've come through it. So Kintsugi Hope is all about beauty out of brokenness. It's all about restoration, reconstruction, reimagination, that type of stuff.
And it's such a beautiful metaphor to, when you look at something that's broken, you think, oh, well, I'm just going to nip over to IKEA and get something brand new, right? And that's how our fast economy and fast society works is, oh, well, that's rubbish now. I'm going to throw that in a landfill and just get something bright and shiny and new. And I think that what I also appreciate about Kintsugi is to see that the brokenness, especially, in a situation like this for a lot of us, we're being broken wide open from being socially distanced and isolated from physical touch of friends and family and for so many weeks that it requires an open way of thinking about your own life and as a leader and your own business and how you bring those pieces back together and start again. So when you say, discovering the treasure in life's scars, what does that mean to you?
Well, I think this came at a really personal time for me when I was running quite a large charity and it was going really well. I had lots of visits from the royal family, and it looked brilliant on the show reel. It looked great on the Facebook page.
Right.
And yet inside, I was really struggling and all sorts of things. I guess sometimes it feels like a perfect storm of things going wrong. And when I look back on that time in my life, I don't think I go, oh, I'm really glad I went through that. But I do realize it made me a different person. It made me hopefully less judgmental, more concerned about integrity. I think integrity, I was reading a book the other day, it said integrity is about being honest about our motives, which I thought was a really interesting definition of integrity. Made me more authentic, more real. And I've noticed that as I share my story, hundreds, if not thousands of people start to go, oh yeah, I feel like that as well. And it's like, you're just a bit more human, I think, a bit more approachable. And I think that that's where the beauty comes in. That's where the gold comes in. And your values start to change and you start to think, oh my goodness, I think, this has definitely changed me, and it's changed me hopefully for the better. Yeah.
Well, and I also, one of my hopes from all of this with the pandemic and beyond, that this is that global wake-up call to a lot of us. Prior to this, there is so much obsession on the perfect veneer and filter on our social media feeds, on our lives, on our businesses, all the things. Like, as you say, on paper, you've got an OBE, you met the queen yourself. Like, things are incredible, aren't they? Like, you're a huge success, Patrick. But if you are crumbling on the inside, then what's the point? I mean, truly, what's the point? And as you said at the beginning of the conversation, or shifting back to the basics of what your true core values are and where your greatest strength comes from. If that is a spiritual belief of yours that you share like Patrick and I, like this is powerful and a reshifting of priorities on a whole. So let's talk about leadership. So when we spoke earlier, you mentioned that self-compassion is a huge part in helping leaders to reduce that anxiety and the panic attacks that come on. So talk to me about what part self-compassion plays in all of this, how to lead when you're not okay.
Yeah, I think self-compassion is absolutely vital. I think sometimes as leaders, we've just got to keep going, and I'm just writing a new book on resilience, and I guess I sort of saw resilience and resistance as the same thing. You know, you just keep going, you just toughen up, you just bash your way through whatever happens. And I realized that isn't what resilience is at all, actually. Resilience is about thriving in the midst of adversity. It doesn't mean that the adversity goes. It means in the midst of it, you work out a way of being. Self-compassion for me is very different to self-indulgence. Self-indulgence is the extra glass of wine at the end of the day just to take the edge off, or the extra bit of food. All those things which actually make you feel good in the short term, but then make you feel guilty afterwards.
Right.
And self-compassion is talking to yourself the way that you would talk to your best friend. Because our biggest critic, if we're honest, is ourselves. And, you know, my wife would often say to me, Patrick, you wouldn't dream of putting any of your employees under the pressure that you put yourself under. You wouldn't dream of talking to them the way that you talk to yourself. And it's true, you know, and I think self-compassion is realizing that I often talk about the shoulds, the musts, the oughts. I should be okay. I ought to be stronger. I must be doing this. And going, where is that actually coming from? Is that going to do me any good in the long run? And I think it's about the internal chatter that is in our heads, and working out how do we actually come with something that's going to do us good in the in the long run. And that's what self-compassion is to me.
Well, and I think that I can certainly resonate with everything you just said there, because I've certainly heard that loop running in my own head at various parts of running my business. And I think that underneath that, at least for me, is I used to believe, well, if I don't, then who is? If I stop cranking the wheel, then everything's going to stop, right? And the reality is that's a lie. If you are a small business owner of one, yes, if you stop cranking the wheel, things will start to falter. But even if you have a handful of virtual assistants, or you do have a small team that supports you, and you just simply open the Wizard of Oz curtain just a little and just say, you know what, today I'm not feeling so great, you guys, and open just a glimmer of what's going on underneath. It's actually quite surprising. Your team will then rise up in ways that you couldn't even imagine. And they go, yeah, I see that. Hey, let me help. I'm going to take those two things off your plate. Or, hey, what if I went and did this part? Or, hey, let's have a quick brainstorm session and we can figure this out together. You don't have to do this all by yourself. I think, as you say with the Kansui metaphor, it lets the light in. It's allowing a little bit of humanity into what you feel is all yours to figure out all by yourself. Yeah,
definitely. And you know, Brené Brown, who's obviously done a lot of research in this area, she says the key thing is for leaders is realizing that vulnerability isn't weakness. If someone stands up and goes, you know what, I'm really struggling with this. You know, my kids, I've got real challenges at home at the moment. We're on lockdown. This is going on. I'm tired. I'm exhausted. I've done so many Zoom calls. This is going on. You know, I'm worried about the future. And it's affecting me. I'm anxious. I feel a bit down. You don't go, oh my goodness, what a weak person. You go, oh my goodness, what a courageous person for sharing. And I think she goes on to say that courage and vulnerability are the same thing. In fact, the Latin word for courage is cur. It means to speak your mind with your heart, to show up and let your true self be seen. And I think that's the type of leadership that's needed at the moment, actually, is people to be real and honest and authentic. And then I think particularly the younger generation, the millennials, you know, there was a bit of research done recently as what are the millennials looking for in a leader? And millennials are making up most of our workforce now. And the three top things that they came up with was what millennials are looking for in their leader is passion, humility, and integrity, which is really interesting, isn't it? It was like they want to be part of the process. They want a collaboration. And so we've got to change our culture in some of our organizations. If you define culture as the way we do things around here, is how do we create a culture of courage and vulnerability and model that as leaders because then you'll create that culture within your business or your organization.
Yeah, and I can think of some of the early jobs that I had before I started my own business. It was a top-down mentality. The big boss is in the cornered office with the door closed 80% of the time. You've been given your task list. Why haven't you done them on time? You're losing money, blah, blah, blah. And it's leadership based on fear. It's based on scarcity. It's based on disconnection. And I think that, again, I think what an opportunity we have now with this pandemic is that, almost 99% of businesses have been flung into, with very little preparation, working remotely, and teams spread across the city or across the state or a whole country as well, having to figure out how to connect and communicate and still run as business as usual. I think that there's going to be some great opportunity in the months to come as people start coming back into a physical office space, of learning different and more innovative ways to work together. And that also requires us as the leader to shift, pivot, refine, and change. So
Absolutely.
Talk to me about some steps towards well-being. So when you're not feeling okay, you're woken up and either it's been a crappy night's sleep or you've woken up to that ever so present panic feeling. In these days and age, our days to days and sometimes our weeks are so uncertain. Things are moving so quickly and changing so fast. Could you give us some simple, practical tips on how to help for better well-being?
Yeah, I think there's most researchers would say there are sort of 5 key things to well-being, really, 5 pathways. Number one is they talk about connect, and that's that sense of you are not on your own. It's being in it together. Even if you just connect with one person that day or 2 people that day. And, during lockdown, particularly at the start, I just made a habit of always texting 2 different people a day, just to go, how are you doing? Are you okay? Just that sense of interaction. Community is really, really, really important. And secondly, second path to well-being is being active. And that may be, even the government have recognised you've got to go outside at some point. You've got to be active. You've got to do something, or walk, cycle, whether it's something in home, to get yourself going, to get your heart rate going. The third one I think is really interesting. They talk about taking notice, and that is taking notice of the way you're thinking, taking notice of what's around you. Again, I think someone, a lot of people said in lockdown is like, I am noticing things about my community I had no idea. Me, I realised that lakes just around the corner from where I lived. I didn't even know they were there before. A lot of people that commute, they're in and they're out and they're home late at night and up early in the morning. Taking notice of what's there. Taking notice also of being much more aware of our thoughts. Instead of becoming our thoughts, actually there's a difference between the thinker and the thought. The thought doesn't always have to control you. They talk about taking a helicopter view a little bit of your thoughts. The fourth path to well-being is that keep learning. And, that doesn't mean you have to start another brand new skill or anything. It just means whatever you're doing, there's a sense of pushing on, moving forward. I know for me, it's simply researching. I like to know the latest stuff, what's going on, how people are feeling, and what are the trends in terms of issues around, particularly for me, issues around poverty and mental health. And I want to try and work it out, keep researching, keep learning. And then the last path to well-being is they talk about give. And that's really about acts of kindness and realizing that the world doesn't revolve around you. And that can be 2 ways, give to your community, but also give to yourself and give kindness to yourself as well. I think kindness, they say, is the best drug. It's the best thing you can do for your mental health. It creates more endorphins than most other things. And I think actually that does, I know businesses who are really invested, and I've worked with some very big corporates in the past who really invested in corporate social responsibility and got all their guys involved. they absolutely loved it. Some of the events we did with them, they were a highlight of the year, and it was a sense of, oh, we get to give back. This is brilliant. And so I would encourage people to think, how can you give back?
Yeah. And, I think that the message I hear there is it doesn't matter how big or small your business is. You can give back in profound ways, in your neighborhoods, your local communities. And now with online, you can literally impact people across the planet. And it doesn't matter how much resources you may or may not have to hand. There are ways to do that. And I also appreciate the zoom out approach. I think when we get so zoomed into our own personal bubble and our own situation or our own cash flow worksheet, and we just get so bottlenecked into it, that's where, for me, the panic starts to rise up of like, oh my God, how am I going to figure this out? Oh, somebody's going to figure this out about me, but that when you zoom out, it's just the same old metaphor that we've all heard a bazillion times. It's so much easier to help and serve other people's problems than it is sometimes to serve your own. But even in that, when you do volunteer or give or, even recently with the NHS, they put a call out to volunteers to just simply be part of the mental hotline. So to talk to people who are struggling with loneliness right now. That doesn't take more than, an access to your phone and a little bit of time. That in that process, that act of kindness without any expectation of return, it's amazing. It changes something in your brain. You start to think in creative ways of like, well, hang on. NHS figured this out in this way to help people. What if our business did something like this over here? And, it starts to spark new ideas and new opportunity in your own world as well. Do you see that?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that those businesses who've invested in those sort of areas, I mean, we used to do lots. I used to work in the inner city of London, and we did loads of kids, getting them employment in some of the bigger banks. And I remember, I think the banks enjoyed it more than the kids sometimes. It was like, oh my goodness, we get to teach these kids these skills and see them succeed, because at the end of the day is we all need someone to believe in us. We've all got where we've got to because someone bothered to believe in us.
Yeah.
And you could be that person for someone else. And like you say, and it's not about trying to boil the ocean. It's sometimes trying to make a difference to one person.
Yeah.
And
that ripples out.
Yeah. I mean, even simple, my daughter, she had a friend who, mum was working at a pub, lost a job or went on furlough. They've hardly got any income coming in, hardly any food in the fridge, a little bit too proud to go to food bank or anything. And so she ordered her a pizza. It was just, and it was a very simple thing, but meant the world to that person, She kept the dignity as she saw it. And there's just so many little things, I think, making a difference to one person can make a huge difference.
And do you feel also part of the process of leading when you're not okay is also giving yourself a little bit of permission to not be okay?
Yeah, absolutely.
I think there's a part of that of feeling so much pressure to get it right, to be something 100% all the time, 24/7 on, that just giving yourself the permission and grace, as you will, to it's okay to have down days and to not be 100%.
100%. Yeah, and I've said constantly, it's okay not to be okay.
Yeah.
And it's okay to have a bad day. Struggling doesn't mean you failed; it means you're a human being.
Yeah.
Actually, and I think for a lot of us, we're looking like the perfectionist in me is someone said, Anne Wilson thinks that perfectionism is self-abuse of the highest order. We put ourselves under huge pressure and feel guilty for things that we shouldn't feel guilty. And, there's two types of guilt. There's false guilt and true guilt. I used to say to my workers, if you're late every single day because you're lazy, you should feel guilty. Actually, if you're late because the train is late and it's totally out of your control,
right?
There's no need to feel bad because it's out of your control. And at the moment, there's so much out of our control, and we can't be in control. And actually, part of getting through this is learning to accept uncertainty, is learning to accept that that's what it's going to be like for a long time.
Yeah.
And cutting ourselves a lot of slack. And, you don't have to be perfect. And
it trickles down to your
okay not to be.
teams. Right? It trickles down to your teams. And if they see you modeling that behavior, then they also can open up to you and say, hey, you know what? Today's not a great day for me. Can I just take a 10-minute walk around the block? Or I really just need to take a couple hours this morning for mental health break. And, I think when I started to open up to my team, we had that two-way conversation and trust. And so no one's going to take advantage of that. I think that's a part of the fear of like, oh, well, if I slack off then, and people think I'm slacking off, then they'll slack off and da-da-da-da. It's all lies, right? So I think that you as a leader remember that people are watching, and even in your most vulnerable times, that is a place of learning for so many around you as well. So here we are in the recovery phase now, and hopefully in the next 6 months or 2 years or however long it takes, we're going to be reconstructing and reimagining a new life. What roles do you feel entrepreneurs play in that recovery phase? What is your hope for the future as we start to put the pieces back together again, Kansui style?
I think my hope is that sense of innovation. Sense, how can we do this differently? What do we need to see happen? Yeah. And I think particularly, like I said at the start of the program, if we think about how do we care for the poorest and the most marginalized and those that are chronically ill, we'll capture pretty much everyone else in the process. And so we do need that creativity at the moment, and we need relationship. I think it's really hard because I feel like I always use this illustration. If you go outside and you look down, there's these sort of grey, lifeless concrete slabs looking back at you, and it's dull and it's depressing. But if you look a bit closer, wherever there's a little gap, there's this like grass growing between the cracks. I'm straining towards the light, and actually what happens is if you just leave it, it will eventually crack the concrete. And I always say to people, I want to be someone who doesn't ignore the grey, the depressing, the pain. That's people's pain, and we need to share in that, and we need to lament with them, and we need to accept that that's their story and it's our story because we're all affected by it. Yeah. But I also want to see the grass growing through the cracks. Where are the signs of hope? Where are the things where I actually think, oh no, that's teaching us something different. There's something in that we can grow, that we can develop, and I think eventually it will crack the concrete, and we'll see something new take place. So it is going to be that role of imagination is going to be so important, I think. But let's do it not so we just for profit and for gain, but let's do it for the sake of those who are poorest in our society.
Yeah, and I believe in that wholeheartedly. And regardless of how big or small your business is or your circle of influence, partnering up with others in your local communities, don't be afraid to reach out to leaders of nonprofits and charities that are similarly aligned and helping people out there. I know a small business owner who, a portion of her profits go to help fund Kiva loans for third world country small business owner entrepreneurs, in Kenya and Nairobi and places like that. So it doesn't matter where you are in the world, you can make an impact. And as you say, the creative problem solving, this truly is our superpower in as we reimagine what this world could look like going forward. So I highly recommend, if you guys are curious to learn more about Patrick and his team and what they're doing here in the UK and around the world, to check out their website. So it's kansugihope.com, and all the links are in the show notes at thesimplifierspodcast.com. You also have your latest book, Honesty Over Silence, which I felt was an incredible book, one that speaks of hope, especially in challenging times. So wherever books are sold, you can find that book there as well. So Patrick, where do you like to hang out online? Where can people connect with you the most?
Well, obviously through the Kintsugi website, but also through social media,
Yeah.
whether that's Twitter or Facebook or Instagram. There's lots of stuff going up there all the time.
Okay, great.
So yeah, people check that out.
Yeah, so we'll put all your social media links in the show notes for people
Great.
as well.
Yeah.
And you also have a podcast with your group. So through
Yeah.
KintsugiHope.com, people can listen to the podcast online there as well.
Yeah.
Okay, great.
Yeah, we started this 12-step program looking at well-being. And so we take a big well-being subject every single month.
Wow.
So the one that came out a couple of days ago was on forgiveness. The one before that, I think, was on resilience. And so we look at some of the big topics, interview different guests and stuff. So it's a good podcast.
Brilliant. Now, there's a few questions I'd like to ask you. I like to ask everybody that comes onto the podcast. And again, thank you so much for your time today. First and foremost, what is one book or blog that you're reading these days that is either inspiring you or poking holes and challenging your belief system?
I've literally just finished a book called Emotional Agility by Susan David. And again, she wrote up some of her research that then went into the Harvard Business Review, which then just went mad. And it's a fascinating book, talking about really, who's in charge? Is it the thought or the thinker? And looking at how we can actually move to a place where we're not reacting instantly, but taking a step back and thinking it through in a different way, and seeing our emotions as signs, but not having to be ruled by those signs. And that's been really, really helpful. So I've literally just finished that. It's a very good book. Yeah.
Great. I will put a link in the show notes for that book as well. So people want to check it out, they can find it there. So tell us, who is one person in your network that you just feel is up to brilliant things? And maybe we could shine a spotlight on them. And who knows, maybe one day we might interview them on the podcast as well.
Yeah, I was thinking the person I wanted to mention is his name's Robert, and he is the head teacher of a school in Jamaica, in Trenchtown. Operation Restoration is the name of the school, and you'll be able to Google them and find their website. And Robert is the head teacher there, and the school is amazing. It is in Trenchtown is a fascinating place, but it's been quite violent. The place where Bob Marley grew up. I've been there 4 or 5 times, and I was there in June, January to June. 600 people were shot. Wow. There's huge amounts of violence, huge amounts of trauma. And one of the things we're doing with the school is employing a mental health counsellor for the school. This guy, he works there, he educates kids, he mentors the kids. He's doing education in probably one of the most challenging places in the world, and just seeing his kids going to university and achieving so much. So, yeah, he's a real inspiration, and the whole work there is fantastic. I'm proud to support it.
That's incredible. Again, what a testament to one person ripples out, brings a team along, and helps so many over time. That's all it starts. It's just one person with an idea. So I believe that gratitude and simplicity go hand in hand. Tell me, what's one thing you're grateful for today?
What I'm grateful for today is, I think I'm just grateful for my team, actually. It was one of our team's birthday today, so we did a surprise Zoom call for her. And there's just a real sense of togetherness, and I think that's what you get when you've got shared values. And I think that sense of, we're a small team, but it was I just thought, these guys, they're the real deal. So I'm very grateful for them.
Yeah, and now more than ever, I am a firm believer in this. While we are all sort of putting a Band-Aid on it right now with Zoom calls and virtual meetups, coming together in person is going to be so much more beautiful and special. We're going to take it a lot more seriously, I think, in the future, and it's going to be powerful when we do meet together in in-person conferences and events. So again, the website is kintsugihope.com for people that want to connect with you and your team, read the books, listen to the podcast, check out the courses and all that beyond. But my final question for you today is this, Patrick. And again, thank you so much for sharing this and having this conversation today. Someone somewhere in the world right now is listening to this podcast, and she is a leader. She does have a circle of influence, whether it's just in her own household or in a greater scale in her city. And she is not feeling okay today. What's one thing you could whisper into her ear right now just to encourage her in this moment?
Struggling doesn't mean you failed. It means you're human.
Yeah.
It's okay not to be okay. And, and to be honest, I think in this pandemic, people change by the hour, and that's okay. You can have a great hour and emotionally, and the anxiety can build up, and that's okay. I think reach out for help, talk to someone, don't struggle. You're not on your own. There are people out there who are going through exactly the same thing. Someone said there isn't actually a personal problem on the planet because there are so many people that have gone through similar things to what you've been through. Yeah. And they, get the right person, they'll offer empathy and understanding, and so keep going.
Thank you, Patrick. Really appreciate you.
No worries. Absolute pleasure. Thank you for asking me.